Joining us on this Monday. My name is Colin Bunch. You probably can't see me right now, but I work with the Commercialization Academy and with the Mentor Network through Venture Partners. Started kind of back in January, so hopefully I've met some of you, but might not have got a chance to meet everyone before we all got sent home for a while. Today we're going to talk about, license versus startup, some of the different frameworks and decisions that you can work through your idea on, and have a number of experts from our own program to share their thoughts and experiences. I'll go ahead and kick it off and turn it over to Sally, who's the director of the Commercialization Academy, and kind of put this into context.
Oh, great. Hey, Colin, before I start, or before you finish there, can you just make sure that you're recording? Because I think that you need to record as the host.
Looks
or
like
is that Angie?
Angie is recording. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, okay, want me to go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, then, hi everybody. I'm Sally Hatcher, and I think I know most of you. I was looking through the names on the list today. Thanks for coming. It's great to see you, and I hope that you're all doing really well in this really crazy time. So there's just a ton going on, and we're kind of getting that point where we're not just surviving at home, but at this point we're kind of on the road to learning to thrive. So I hope that you are getting used to it and getting comfortable with doing everything online. And honestly, it's a great time to be thinking about your startup or your commercialization ideas. So interestingly, at Venture Partners on CU, we are seeing that business is up for us. So all the lab scientists are coming out of their labs and calling us now to talk about their intellectual property. So this really is a good time to just check in, talk about your ideas, and see if we can help you figure out what's next. So on that note, this is number 4 in a series that we started this year of the 12 steps, as we see it, to entrepreneurship for a campus startup. So starting back in January, just real quick, the overview was that you're starting from a different position. So when you are coming out of the lab, you have invented something very cool, but it's effectively inventing a solution. And now you have to go look for the problem in industry that it solves. So we talked about that. We've recorded all of these conversations, and you can catch up with us if you'd like. We talked about a few things you're going to stumble across, like founders agreements, that you're going to need to deal with at some point. In our second session, we jumped into customer discovery, because fundamentally what every small business needs before anything else is a customer who wants to buy your future product. So you've got to find those customers before anything else is worth doing. Last time in March, we talked about IRLs, or innovation readiness levels. And it's a method that we're now using to track you on 6 different metrics of your startup idea and where do you actually need to put work next. So number 3 was basically an organizing principle on how you think about the problem of what to do next for you. So that's a really good one for interacting with us. And we can walk you through the metrics and then help you figure out what are the next steps that you need. So this month is one that I really like, and this is called License or Startup. The fundamental idea that we're going to go through today is that if you want to commercialize your ideas, there are 2 ways to do it. One is to form your own startup, form that small business, and try to go build customers, build the company, and ultimately sell your products to people. But another way of doing this is de-risking your idea enough that you can license that out to a larger company, or maybe a different startup who will take that idea and run with it. So you return to your lab, you give them some scientific feedback, perhaps you are the CTO for a small period of time or the chief science advisor, but basically you're licensing it. And that can really be a good opportunity. There are real reasons, monetary and otherwise, time and money, that you might want to do that. So today we've got a crackerjack lineup of folks from Venture Partners to talk about whether you want to license or startup and which might actually be good in your situation. So I'm going to turn it over now to Bren Reese, who's going to give the overview of what it looks like here at CU in specific.
Thank you very much, Sally. And hi, everybody. Bren Reese, I'm the Managing Director for Venture Partners. And I see I've been given the opportunity to share my screen, so I'm going to do that and bring a few slides up. Okay, so, we often talk about this as this binary decision, startup or license. And I want to make the distinction that starting at the university, looking at these two options, in a certain way, they're actually both licenses. We simplify and say startup or license, but we're looking at the university either licensing an innovation and its intellectual property into a startup or licensing that into an established company. And from there, we could say that both of these entities have the same ultimate goal, right? Which is to have a commercialized invention. But there is also a lot of differences. And we're going to start with what's actually the same, right? So we're looking at a long-term path, right? For most university innovations, we're looking at 5 to 10 years and $5 to $50 million. Now, there's definitely exceptions to that, and it varies a lot by the industry. So if you're looking at a software innovation, you might be able to have a product up and running within a year, and you might not need even $1 million to do that. If you're looking at a biotech invention, we could be over 10 years and over $50 million. So there's a long range, but typically these are capital intensive and time intensive businesses. So that's certainly in common. Some other things are that whether you do a startup or whether you want to partner with a company, you've got to have that strong value proposition, right? So if you came to the intro to customer discovery, you might recognize that term of value proposition, or you may have seen it elsewhere. And that's where you can concisely state what it is that you're making, who is it for specifically, and why they care. So without that, there's no startup. Without that, there's no partnership with a company. And then secondly, the size of that opportunity does need to be significant. And what is deemed significant may vary by who you're trying to work with. If you're working with a venture capitalist, they might want to see a total market size in excess of $100 million. If you're working with a company who has an established product line and wants to add a feature that you've innovated, they might be satisfied with something less than that. So there's also these unique aspects of a startup and an established company. And beginning with startups, you're going to have to build a team, right? And while startups are thinking about how can we get to revenue, how are we going to get there, at a certain point you do get there, and then becomes the issue of scale comes up. So how do we make this product that we've finally developed and got into our customer's hand? How do we do that at mass? On the other side, an established company doesn't need to worry about a team. They've got that, and scaling things is their bread and butter. However, they look at risk very differently than a startup company, and they're often a lot less risk tolerant. At the same time, they're not going to be looking at any and all venture opportunities with quite the breadth that a startup might, right? They need to see strategic alignment with their current business. So those are some of the key things that differentiate the two. And because of those differences, what we end up seeing is actually a little different. So this kind of binary straight line to commercialized invention isn't quite what we observe. And what's there instead is something a little more like this. Startups are quite good at taking on that early risk and doing the early development of the product. But when it comes to scaling, they don't have that huge sales and marketing team. They may not have large scale manufacturing and distribution channels. So they're not quite as good at that. And that's signified with the less emphatic arrow. On the other side, at a company, you've got, in some ways, quite the opposite. Unwillingness to take on the risk of early stage research and development, but really a lot of excellence at the later stage aspects of commercialization. So these two things you can see line up quite well. And what that often results in is this acquisition, right? So this can happen at various stages along the path towards commercialized invention, but it's often towards the end. So the startups take on the risk, they do early development, and at a certain point, they become an attractive acquisition target to an established company that has a similar strategic objective. So where we see this a lot, just as an example, is in the bioscience industry. So no startup takes a product all the way through to the market, right? It's just not feasible at that cost and scale. But at a certain stage in clinical development, they become attractive for acquisition by large pharma. So if that's the general process, let's look at some of the actual data. What do we see happening? So we're going to look at some national university data. And starting off 10 years ago, we saw about 1/3 of all the exclusive licenses out of universities were going to startups and about 2/3 to established companies. If we fast forward to today, you can see that it's actually a little over half, so an increasing trend there. Let's have a look at our own university. If you went back 10 years ago, not showing those data here, but if you go back 10 years ago, we look just about the same as how it was nationally, about 1/3 to startups and 2/3 to established companies. But current data are that we're even more pronounced shift towards startups than some of our national peers. So I'm going to take a little pause there and just see if anybody would like to offer a guess or comment as to why this may be happening. Why are we seeing universities shifting more towards startups than to licensing to established companies? And I'll throw in the data point that it's not that we're doing less licenses to established companies. It is more startups.
Someone in the chat put that, it's the industry is really pushing, de-risking into, startups or having people do it that way before they're interested.
Yeah, Colin, did you say that industry is driving it?
Yeah, at least part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was totally a comment in the chat.
Yep, absolutely agree that. So less and less risk tolerance. We saw this in the early 2000s in pharma, and basically saying we're not doing early stage R&D. Startups can do it. They can take the risk and we'll pay a premium. But then we're definitely seeing other industries following suit as well. Any other?
Another comment was greater access of venture capital.
Yep.
This is Mark. I would actually suggest that there's less access to venture capital for these early stage companies now compared to, let's say, 20 years ago. I think that there are it's very true that the industries, most industries, I think, certainly in bioscience, are trying to de-risk what they put money into, and they just want to see a lot more mature companies. But I do think that this reflects a couple other things as well. One is that I think the mindset of young researchers today is very different than it was 20 years ago. And I think people really are more interested in taking their invention and turning it into a company and something that they can work with. They're interested in working with it. And then I think that as well has led to the formation of groups like Venture Partners, which is really helpful in helping young scientists and inventors to move their stuff forward. So I think all three of those things are playing off each other.
And for those of you who don't know Mark, Mark's a longtime venture capital investor. Mark, would you say that there is more capital available, but maybe it's just, it's later stage now, it's moving later and later?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there are less venture funds now than there were in the year 2000, for example, but the ones that remain are much bigger, and they tend to invest in more mature companies. You know, they tend to come in Series B or Series C, as opposed to seed rounds or Series A rounds. And so I think it's more difficult, but at the same time, I think you're finding industry actually, the type of license, and I'd love to hear from you guys, but I think the type of licenses that these industries are doing are a little bit different than they were 20 years ago as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I remember, I mean, some of the licenses we saw when I started out in this field about almost 20 years ago, I mean, I would do a backflip if I saw that now. Okay. Was there anybody else wanted to make a comment?
There's a question from in Jordan. Could it be that easier for universities to recoup their investment by taking a larger share of the startup versus a smaller stake of in working with the established company?
So that's a great question, right? Is that do universities see this as more lucrative and should they encourage startups because they're getting equity? I'll show some data in a little bit about revenue to the university and how that comes from startups and from established companies. But I'll say this, that the trend towards taking more equity, you do see that in some universities who are offering more startup development services. So you can see some universities taking equity as high as 20%. But I'd say if anything, universities are tending to take less equity in effect to try and do more startups by making it more favorable to the startup founders. Yes, the university has a possibility of generating revenue there, but I think that certainly at CU Boulder, we want to make sure that the startup founders are properly incentivized.
And then there's another question, where is the money coming from for early stage startups? That could be a whole other class, but.
I think that is a whole other class, isn't it? How to get funded early stage. But maybe just very briefly, yes, so startups are needing to find that early risk tolerant capital, and you see sometimes governments, state governments creating incentives like we have, or programs like we have here at Colorado, the Advanced Industries Accelerator that provides non-dilutive grant funding to early stage companies. We're also seeing more venture competitions that often carry cash prizes. And then universities themselves are creating their own investment firms and funds as well.
And there was a question, is that different in areas like software, versus biotech?
Is what different?
The numbers of startups, versus license.
Oh, I see. Got it. That's a great question. I've not actually done the data analysis on that because we don't have that at the national level. But at the university level, I'd say it's actually quite consistent. So if we look back over the last 20 years, let's say maybe 40% in the biosciences, another 40% in physical sciences and engineering, and then the last 20% in software. Okay, great questions. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to keep moving along. So we talked about some of the different criteria that might indicate that a startup or an established company is the way to go, like risk and like strategic alignment. But I also want to talk about some of the implications for you as inventors, because that's an important thing that you should be considering as well. So starting back with a license. So over on the left side, there's either this license between the university and the company, the established company, or between the university and the startup. And in the latter case, we have our licensing with ease program, which is a investor validated and vetted license that's pre-negotiated. So we know our startups are getting a good and quick deal. But then move forward to that commercialized invention. And the university is going to, in both cases, receive royalties, right, from the company that's selling products, hitting commercial milestones. And for every dollar that the university receives, not every dollar that the licensee company makes, but instead the royalties that come into the university, it gets split up into those 4 categories that you can see there. So in both cases, whether you're doing a startup company or your innovations being licensed, there's a way to financially benefit. So here's where I want to break that down a little further and look at our own university's licensing revenue over the last 10 years. And you can see it's heavily biased towards revenues from established companies over startups. So this may give you pause and could raise the question of, this is not what I expected, right? I saw that there's this heavy emphasis on doing more deals with startup companies. Why is the revenue seemingly the inverse of that? So I want to talk a little bit about this. The first point is that it really underscores the, let's say, the suitability and the excellent position that an established company is going to be in to successfully commercialize the innovation, right? Startups have a very high failure rate. And if you can partner with an established company, generally the guidance is to go ahead and do that, right? I saw in some of the marketing for this seminar, it said, is there a formula? And the answer is no, there's no formula for startup versus established company. But if there's anything close to that, it goes something like this, which is if there is a successful established company willing to partner with you at an early stage, you should do it, right? The ideal outcome of a startup is that it raises money and that it develops and de-risks the technology, puts together a team and a compelling value proposition, and maybe one day gets to partner with or be acquired by an established company, or maybe even become one itself. But if all that risk and capital and time can be bypassed and that partnership can be formed from day one, that's 9 times out of 10 going to be the right decision. So one thing is risk, but the other point I want to make here is that let's remember that this is a long process, right? 10 years and a lot of capital involved, and that those established companies don't want to take that early risk. So startups often are a necessity, and the only path forward to commercialize something is to go through a startup. And I think increasingly people are seeing that. The data that I showed with most of the revenue coming from established companies, because this is such a long process, those revenues are coming from licenses that were done 10, 15 years ago before startups had seen this real surge. So it may be that in another 10 years, when we're looking at the fruition of the startups that we're seeing now, this huge increase, we may see that the revenue really shifts. So that's one of the other reasons why it's so skewed in that direction. So this may bring up the question for you, well, why do it, right? Why do a startup company if it's risky? And there is this additional financial incentive, at least, in addition to maybe the startup being the only viable path forward at the early stage. And so in addition to getting this share of royalties that the university receives, when inventors form their own company, they're going to have founders' equity. And then upon an acquisition or upon a public offering of that startup company, they're going to have an opportunity to liquidate those shares and get a financial upside. So depending on the many myriad of ways that a startup's path can go in terms of the money that they raise and the exit that they get, that could potentially be quite lucrative. I also want to note that some universities, like MIT, require that their researchers and inventors choose one of these two streams. So you can either participate in a share of the university's royalties, or you can forego that and have your founder's equity. And CU is among the universities that do allow both. So you can benefit from your share of university's royalties, and you can also have your founder's equity. Okay. So I'd like to just summarize a few points that we've talked about here. The first is that we can either license directly to your startup company or to an established company. In most cases, the innovation is going to be too early to partner with a large company right off the start. But if you do have that opportunity, that's often a very good one to pursue. In absence of that, startups are an excellent way to de-risk the innovation and also de-risk the market opportunity, because that's often new as well. And then last 2 points are that we're seeing this trend that where universities are increasingly licensing to startups. We talked about some of the factors there. And then last of all, either way, whether you do want to pursue your own startup company or partner with a company, an existing company, there is financial upside, and of course, additional upside for the startup and a lot of additional work. So I'll pause there.
Awesome. We'll let Deepika take over in a minute. Does anyone have any questions for Bren? Got some in the chat. Does the university have a preference?
So that's definitely going to be a case-by-case scenario. But I think what's common is what's driving that preference, right? Which is a successful translation of the innovation into the marketplace. So if it's going to be more viable one way or the other, we'll make our best guess. Very hard at that early stage to really know, but we're looking for viability over all else. There is something in the Bayh-Dole Act, Federal Act of 1980, that says universities should have, all things being equal, should give preference to small businesses. It's rare that all things are equal, but that's something that we do abide by.
Cool. All right, and if anyone has any questions, keep throwing them in the chat. We'll turn it over to Deepika.
Awesome. Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Bren. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay, awesome. So hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Deepika Singh, and I am the Senior Licensing Manager for the Bioscience Portfolio at Venture Partners. And I thought I would bring in my perspective and a licensing manager's perspective and talk about how licensing managers work with researchers when thinking about whether to spin out a company versus licensing into an established company. So one of the first things we consider is whether the researchers are interested in starting a company or not. So when researchers flag the opportunity for us early on in the process as a startup, then we help them think about, next steps, and we connect them with startup specific resources at Venture Partners and also outside of Venture Partners. Next thing we think about is the innovation itself, whether it is a one product play versus multiple product versus platform technology, right? So if you come up with an improvement that improvises on a technology or a product that's owned by an existing company, then it would make sense for a lot of different reasons to do a licensing deal with this company, right? But if you're dealing with a multiple product play, or let's say a platform technology, such as a drug discovery technology, then you could go either way, but it would be fine to spin out a company under that scenario. If the decision was made early on to not put the technology into a startup, then at Venture Partners, we have our business development team conduct a marketing outreach and industry outreach to see, what kind of commercial feedback we can get from the industry, right? So if the industry tells us that they're just not interested in the opportunity, or if they think the opportunity is not commercially viable, then neither startup nor licensing into an existing company makes sense. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. Was there a question there, Colin?
Yeah, what's kind of clarifying what's like a multiple product versus platform technology?
So a platform technology would be like a drug discovery engine that you could use to develop, let's say, drugs against different targets. And, and that could be a multiple product play as well, right? If a single company was producing drugs for different diseases or against different targets. So my examples are going to be heavily skewed towards bioscience. So physical science folks, feel free to chime in at any point. Okay, so Bren touched on this a little bit, but sometimes startups are formed out of necessity. So if the funds aren't there to further translate or move the innovation out of the lab, then we see that a lot of our PIs spin out companies such that they can pursue non-dilutive funding, such as SBIR, STTR funding, and also dilutive funding to, to sort of move the needle on their innovation and take the innovation out of the lab. So control is another, topic that I see often. So my take on control is that when researchers have a technology or an innovation they're highly passionate about, then they typically lean more towards startup. So what do our serial entrepreneurial faculty do? They tend to spin out technologies that they're super excited about, passionate about, and want to be intimately involved with its development. And where they have an innovation that certainly is an innovation and is licensable, but they're not as excited about it, then they work with venture partners on marketing that technology and then licensing it if possible.
I'm curious, do you see that change, over time as they get into the actual startup life?
Absolutely. I mean, as the company starts to raise financing, faculty tend to kind of shift their roles. But in the interim, if they're excited about being involved with the R&D process, or if they're interested in spearheading the technology in the initial stages, then then startup is the route that they choose. Okay, and then the last thing, Bren already touched on this, is the income piece. We see faculty CU allows faculty to double dip, right? So if we were licensing into an existing company, the inventors would get 25% of the proceeds that venture partners generates, and the other 25% goes to the lead PI's lab. Under this startup scenario, the inventors get 25% of what venture partners get from the startup, and the 25% also goes to the lead PI's lab. But depending on what the inventor's equity position is in the startup company, they may have additional financial benefit because of that. So they kind of get to double dip under the startup scenario, and we allow for it, as Bren said. So, I'll quickly go over a couple examples depending on how we're doing on time. So I had a technology that utilized a specialized flow microscope and convoluted neural networks to detect cells and particles. So in a nutshell, this technology had applications ranging from blood diagnostic to water quality tests. So the researchers were pretty sure from the beginning that they didn't want to start a company around this. There were several reasons for this. I don't think we have time to go into the details. But the researchers also received licensing interest from a few different companies at a conference they attended. So in this example, the licensing strategy that we employed was to do exclusive field of use or application restricted licenses, meaning we gave the medical diagnostic application to one company and the water quality testing application to another company and biopharmaceutical analysis field to yet another company. So these companies had different expertise, and therefore we were able to divvy up the rights by way of applications. So another type of tech we see often in the bioscience space is a novel drug target that the researchers have discovered in their lab. This target could be a potential therapeutic for a disease, let's say leukemia, if a drug could be developed against it, right? But in this case, we often see researchers spinning out companies to pursue non-dilutive and dilutive funding to further validate the target, de-risk the technology, and develop and screen compounds against the target. And this is because pharma companies are generally not interested in licensing when the drug discovery and validation is in really, really early stage, let's say pre-animal data stage. So, you know, in my experience, pharma companies become interested in licensing and acquisition when the lead drug compound has been heavily de-risked, and that typically means that the compound is in clinical trials, or at minimum preclinical studies have been done and an IND filing has been initiated. So this is, you know, this is a scenario that I see often. So I will stop there for, you know, I'm happy to take questions now or towards the end. But I think we have a couple more folks waiting to go.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what, you know, your portfolio of stuff, do you see more license or startups?
Definitely startups. 80%
Yeah.
of my portfolio, I would say, is startups. And that kind of goes back to the funding issue I talked about, right? So a lot of times researchers are finding themselves to spin out companies so that they can pursue dilutive and non-dilutive funding to kind of move their innovation out of the lab.
All right, we'll turn it over to Martha.
Actually, Deepika, I have a quick question for you. This apology, Sridhar's chiming in here real quickly. When I guess this is very highly dependent on the industry and everything, but what are the kind of de-risk targets that these established companies want to see, or is that just you just kind of keep having conversations and work towards a goal, or you know?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what it is, right? So if you're talking about a drug technology, then at minimum, they're going to want to see, you know, some animal data. Ideally, they would want to see an IND application that's already been submitted. Initial talks with the FDA have been done. And, you know, and obviously, ideally, right, they would want the drug to at least have been through phase 1 trials. And on the device side, I think as long as you know, the company or the lab has some kind of a alpha prototype, I think that works well.
Thank you. That helped.
And Mark Lupa kind of addressed that in the chat too, if you want to follow up on that. Any other questions for Deepika? All right. If you want to turn it over, I can share, or Marta, if you want to drive.
Yep. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Colin, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Cool. All right. Take it away.
And can everybody hear me well? Okay. So My name is Marta. I'm the Director of Licensing for Venture Partners at CU Boulder. From my experience, there are very few instances where license to an existing company is the only path. And there are a few that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to license to an existing company and really should be a startup. So those are the far ends of the spectrum. In my experience, most technologies can really be either. Bren and Deepika gave you a good overview of how each path works and some questions to consider when making that decision. I'll also add from my personal experience that starting a company is really hard. And it's not just risky, but it's also very difficult. For example, you will need to learn a new skill set. You essentially end up living and breathing everything startup, and that's sometimes difficult to balance the startup duties and duties as a researcher at a university. In the end, you could end up getting more. The payoff could be larger, or you could end up, getting nothing. That's also a possibility with a startup. I worked with a professor who actually did both. He first went and he did a startup around the first innovation, his first big innovation. In the end, the exit didn't actually work out all that well for him. So with the second one, he didn't want to repeat the same story. In the end, he was shocked to learn that he received more from the license than he did from his startup. So that's also something that could possibly happen. Now, let's see. What's on the next slide? All right. Okay. So for licensing, so let's say for an example of a technology that in physical sciences that really should be, that really is on that far end of the spectrum, that really should be licensed in an existing company. So I have a good one. I recently worked with some couple of physicists whose technology ended up being perfectly suited for that. These two physicists developed an add-on to an existing research instrument. It's a kind of huge, expensive device on the order of $500,000 to $1 million. I went and to see it, and that thing could fill an entire room. It's big. I mean, if you're feeling cramped right now, working from home, that device. It was very large, big, expensive, specialized. Very few of them are sold a year. The market is dominated by a couple companies that have been doing this for decades. Most importantly, the technology was very specific to the device made by these companies. So that's something that Deepika touched on. It really is an improvement to someone else's device. So that's that was one big consideration. Another big consideration. In addition, the customer was well known already. There was a researcher, a physicist at a university or another research institution that was well known, so we roughly knew the size of the market. And that was smallish, not really a great fit for VC funding. The technology was quite far along, so it could be licensed to an existing company. And in the end, one of those existing companies actually wanted to license it. So, so those are some of the things that really made us aware that this is a license play, right? So an improvement on an existing device, highly specialized, market is smallish, worthwhile for an existing company, but not really all that exciting for a VC. In the end, also the researchers didn't want to go and reinvent the wheel, didn't want to start a company unless they absolutely had to do that. That's a few things that you can also consider. That's all I have. Any questions?
We have a question from Sally. So Marta is saying a small market usually makes sense to license. Can you find a company that is interested in a small market and will spend time to license and develop that product?
Sorry, can you find a company?
Large or small, that is interested in a small market and will spend time to license and develop that product?
I think you can find licensees for both, right? A large company, you can find a large or small company that could be interested in licensing in a small market. I think partially it's because they already know their customer, right? They already know the value proposition and the product market fit. Like if that's known, then sure, why not, right? It's the kind of risky, unknown, unproven value proposition that might be that would require a really huge market to be interesting to a VC.
Okay. Thanks, Marta. If anyone has any more questions, throw them in the chat, or we'll follow up at the end when we have time. I think we're going to keep rolling on to Nicole. Are you ready to go?
I am, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, so yeah, Nicole Forsberg is my name. For us that haven't met, I'm the business development person at Venture Partners, and I work exclusively with, or more or less exclusively with the technologies that are going into licensing. And so what I wanted to give just a brief idea of is, well, so based on all the information that you've heard, you've decided that doing a licensing play is the most efficient process to move forward with. And so how can we maximize the impact of this technology, and also, which I think everybody is happy with, maximize the revenue. So I just wanted to give you a couple pointers on, what goes on in my head when I get a technology on my table that is a licensing play. And so, and there can be a huge difference really if you do sort of a proper homework on what the strategy is going to be moving forward in your licensing. So number one, which I think has been very clear throughout the whole presentation here, is to know your technology's worth. Even if you are not going to sort of create a startup, I definitely strongly recommend to join in on the Commercialization Academy programming to get help on sort of creating a very clear and strong value proposition for your technology. And also finding out the examples. I know Deepika mentioned one of her technologies that could, figure out that, well, it could analyze blood, but it could also analyze water. Knowing sort of figuring out the scalability of your technology. And sort of the first thing that I usually do is to look at the market, getting market intelligence. There are some really sophisticated market databases out there, and we subscribe to quite a few of them. And so we can get data from the market to see, well, so you have this piece of technology, well, who do you actually want to license to? You can, if you have a strong enough technology, you can choose which players would be most beneficial to license to. Not saying that it's easy to sell technologies on the market, but it helps to sort of be strategic to who you want to reach out to. So it's great to get inbound leads. We do a lot of passive marketing at Venture Partners, but it works the other way around as well. So yeah, look at what industries are most relevant, what sort of areas and industries can your technology be applied to, and then based on this market intelligence, well, what industries do have the largest sort of pain? Where does this, say it's a process improvement, where does this problem, in what industries does this problem cost them the most money, and who has the sort of the largest pain that you can solve? You definitely want to talk to these companies. And then, since the function of the income is largely, and the licensing managers can speak more to this, but the revenue is oftentimes based on royalty payments, right? So you want to have an idea of who has a large sales revenue as well, if it is a product that will be incorporated into new products that they will sell. Right, and then let's see, next slide here. Yeah, thank you. And then there are also, as we touched upon, different types of licenses that you can do. An exclusive license, which you can hear from the name, is that you sort of license the technology for exclusive use to a certain company. And then there's a non-exclusive license where, yeah, the company has the freedom to operate, right? They license this technology so that they can use it, but they're not the only person, the only company that has the right to run with it. And typically you would get, as you can probably figure out, an exclusive license is usually worth more than a non-exclusive license that pay more to be the only player on the market to use this. Well, if you do, and of course you want to get an exclusive license, but there are also ways to go about it, and also was touched upon this before. Say you do have an exclusive license, but a company in the biotech sector wouldn't be penalized if there was a company in a totally different sector that licenses this exclusively as well. When then we can choose to have a sort of limited field of use for this patent, which is really ideal. And this sort of enables you to maximize the revenue and the impact from this patent. A company in companies in different industries license the technology exclusively, but they're not in any way competitive with each other, which means that we can get strong revenue streams and impact from the patent, but in many different industries. So just a few pointers, and this is all I wanted to add, but there are, I guess my main message is to say that there are ways that we can support you in, if you do decide to go with a license and not form a startup, there are ways to be sort of strategic about how you can maximize the impact and the revenue from the licensing game. And we'd love to work with you on this. That's all I had. The discussion.
So Sally just had there's some kind of conversation in the chat. Does anyone have any questions for Nicole?
Yes. Let's see, one here now, and I can help look for licensees. Yes, certainly. That is what I do, spend most of my time doing. So I'm building up, or we are building up. We have a database of companies that we keep in touch with on a shouldn't say daily basis, but certainly build relationships. One benefit I should also mention, I mean, one benefit of being a university versus a smaller private company is that it's oftentimes easier to get in the door with these big companies, because you come and you represent this large portfolio of technology. So, and you're not actually selling anything directly to them, right? You're just representing a pool of great technologies that are vetted through us. So really use us. And I would say, I mean, even if you do have a startup, really use us as a university to get into some companies that you would like to get sort of contacts at. We can definitely help with that. And we have quite a few connections to date as well. So we can definitely help with that. That answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll send out an email with everyone's contact info from the presentation and recording and the slides as well, so you can follow up later. Let's see. We're about out of time, so we'll keep moving through the end of it and see if anyone has any other questions. I did want to point out, Bren mentioned earlier, there's a number of COVID-19 specific programs, funding opportunities. It's on the main page of Venture Partners, short linked. I'm sure you've seen it around everywhere, but take a look in there. Follow up with us if you have any questions on, how what you're doing could apply to some of those programs. And then coming up, Sally, I don't know if you want to talk through the 6-pack startup challenge.
Sure. So let's see here. We're not going to hold research to market this spring. Typically, that's one where you really need to be in person and not virtual. So at least for now, we're going to punt that toward August and see what happens. So in its case, we are running a 6-week program called our 6-pack Startup Challenge. And it's a light touch, but it should be good information. So it's going to be once a week for an hour. We will be talking about basically where are you right now and what are the things that you can do from home to push your startup forward. We're also going to be pairing you with a mentor. So we have some just absolutely awesome people volunteer with the university, really interesting with huge depth of expertise. And we're going to be asking them to meet with you once a week just to talk about your ideas and make sure that you're staying on track. So yeah, please reach out to myself. I'm sally.hatcher@colorado.edu or colin.bunch@colorado.edu if you're interested. It would be great to know if you're interested so we can match you with a mentor. And this is just a great way to kind of be involved in the community and helping to push yourself along while you're at home. So we hope you'll join us.
All right. And then our next Elements Lunch and Learn will be on exploring your ecosystem, looking at mapping. That is a huge ongoing process, but understanding industry, the interconnectedness with customers and different partners, regulatory frameworks. I'm not sure if there's anything else I should touch on with that, Sally, but that'll be a big session coming in May.
Yep. I think that'll be it. We hope you'll join us. That's our 5th in this lineup of 12. All of these will be on video. All of them are available for you to take a look at on your own time as well. So ecosystem is another one that will be a bit more like a workshop where we're going to try to help you figure out what your ecosystem looks like. And that goes back to figuring out who your customers, your competitors, and your collaborators will really be once you get off campus.
All right, we got about 1 or 2 minutes if anyone has any questions for Bren, Sally, Nicole, Deepika, Marta.
Hey, Colin, could I get you to flip back to the picture, all the presenters today, as we pop out, just so people.
Yeah, I flew past it. I was worried about timing. So here's some of the folks we've had on that call. Sam and Lucy are 2 of the interns that work with Commercialization Academy, and they're going to be, helping us, do follow-up and support for some of the teams in the 6-pack challenge, looking at some specific market research, things like that. And then you heard from most of the other folks on today's presentation.
Hey guys, there's a question about accessing past recordings.
Yeah, we have those all.
Those are being put up now.
Go ahead, Sally.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, Colin. Yeah, so they're all available. Reach out to Colin or myself. They are going up on our resources webpage now. So they are certainly available. Email is probably the easiest for this week. So great. Colin, I'm just going to say one more time, thanks again to everybody for coming. Really glad to have you. If you have further questions, you can stay on the Zoom or just reach out to us. We're delighted to talk to you about all of this. It's what we think about all the time, every day. So reach out and we'll talk about your ideas. Thanks.
Thank you guys. It's great.